Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, May 23rd, 2018. What a wacky, crazy kind of day it is today. It is Wednesday. We are without Joan McCarter, however. It doesn't feel like a Wednesday if Joan McCarter isn't here, but it feels like half a Wednesday because Craig Dworkin will be here. What does half a Wednesday feel like? What is the sound of one half of a Wednesday doing anything, really? Good morning and welcome to the show. Lots to get to today. We'll get to about 3 of the 5 million things. That is to say, 1, 2, 3. Not 3 million of the 5 million. That would be a pretty good record. Today, we're, who knows where we're going to start. Daily Co's Radio is live now. We know we're going to start there. Bill starts us off with a morning tweet each day. Some days, I'm so wrapped up in the crazy that I hardly even get a chance to read it. But today, hey, he says, I've got a question for me. That's interesting. He says he's got a question for me. I'm not him. You get the idea. Are you a spy? He wants to know. I've never denied it. This is true. And even if I do deny it, that's just what a spy would do. Yes, I think that's probably about right. We'll spend another, couple of minutes straightening out what a spy is and what a spy isn't, and what the whining, screaming, stuck pig in the White House is yelling about this morning. I see Daily Kos as an entity has tweeted out, I guess, is this the title of the morning piece? I haven't had a chance to zip through the headlines yet. Hold on to your socks. It says, Trump's morning tweets welcome you to the upside down. Now, of course, if you're upside down, the one thing you don't have to hold on to is your socks. And really, you don't even have to hold on to them when you're right side up these days. Thanks to the miracle of elastic, I can finally get rid of my garters. It's about time. I really need to catch up with things. And there's probably an app for it anyway, even if I don't use them. But yeah, that's, I get the idea, but just a note to the editors there. It would be inconsistent with being turned upside down to have to hold on to your socks. It's the sort of thing that Donald Trump might do if he were upside down. And then his wig would fall off, and, well, who knows what would happen after that. There's plenty of things to round up today. Greg is already compiling them by the thousands. And, man, it's crazy out there. Extraneous material worth considering in our morning roundup. Saw this one tweeted out by John Whitehouse of Media Matters, who happened to have drawn the short straw, I guess, and was watching Fox and Friends, probably along with Matt Gertz, trying to figure out why is the president tweeting about one thing or another. Today, I think his TV tweet today was about the, what's her name? Everybody has a fake name for her, but her actual name is Tomi Lahren. I don't know how she says it. I've never actually figured that one out either. And it's not because she's an idiot or anything. I mean, she is one, but that's not the reason I haven't figured out how to pronounce her name. I don't know anybody's name. So, I guess, I don't know. She went on the show and said something, or appeared on the show and showed her golden locks, and Donnie got a telly, let's say, interest going on. And he tweeted out this morning that she was fantastic and fabulous. But one of the other things that the Fox and Friends folks occupied themselves with is that Fox host and Trump advisor, which is a dual role these days. Is this right? Pete Hegseth? Is this person's name is Pet? Is it Pete? And it's a typo, or what? I don't know. I mean, it's somehow appropriate to be named Pet Hegseth. I don't know who hosts that show. But speaking of, Kim Jong-un says, we're trying to figure out whether or not this stupid summit is going to happen or not. We'll see, is all that the president can say about it. Fox host and Trump advisor Hegseth on Kim Jong-un, the guy who wants to meet with Dennis Rodman and loves NBA basketball and loves Western pop culture. By way of apology, I guess he says he probably doesn't love being the guy that has to murder his people all day long. Probably wants normalization. Yeah, it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. my own people aren't going to murder themselves. I better get cracking. As much as I love NBA basketball and Western pop culture, there's murdering needs to be done. And my daddy used to say, you got to get things done and get cracking first thing in the morning. Greg says it's Pete Hegseth, so it's a typo. It's a good typo. I like it. Pet Hegseth. You should all start calling him that at this point. All right. Well, that leaves us with that tweet to round up for the morning. That's just damn weird. Okay. It's an odd thing to say. It's a very, I guess, Trump advisor / Fox and Friends thing to say. No doubt about that. What else is happening this morning? Oh, gee whiz. I don't know. The news came yesterday. We haven't discussed it yet that I guess they're having to, there was going to be an investigation anyway, but apparently in the Santa Fe, Texas, and I was reminded, please say Santa Fe, Texas. Mostly this is emails and tweets from people from Santa Fe, New Mexico. God, don't put this on us. It's Santa Fe, Texas, the site of the latest school shooting. And you'll never believe it, physics actually works and came into play. If you have a gun battle in an enclosed space full of school kids, the school kids are going to get hit. Somebody, even the people who are not aiming at the school kids, are going to hit some. And they're not even sure yet, and I guess they're still working on it. And I can understand this is going to take some time to figure out. But they apparently had a 15-minute gun battle with the shooter here, who, by the way, for some reason, Senator Cornyn thinks is a victim in all of this. And I guess we could spend a second or two on that at some point, but I don't know if that's really worth digging into. But so they had a gun battle. The police showed up, and of course they had armed guards at the school. And so once again, it's been a long time since a school shooting took place in a quote-unquote gun-free zone, but that hasn't convinced them to stop with the talking point yet. But the armed guard that was on duty got shot almost immediately. And the police and the armed school resource officers exchanged fire. I like the way they put that. Exchanged fire with the gunman for some considerable amount of time. Nobody scored a hit on the gunman. The gunman is arrested alive, unscathed, and I guess there's something to be said for that. But, shots were fired all over the place. And now they think, yes, some of the kids or victims, both adult and, I guess, students who were hit in the gunfire may, in fact, it turns out, have been shot by the police returning fire. Or I guess it depends on who you think shot first. We're pretty sure the shooter shot first. That's what makes him the shooter. And I guess it's to be expected. And, of course, among certain segments of gun culture, they just say, yeah, well, that's just the way it goes when you have gun battles inside of schools. And you got to have a gun battle because what are you going to do? Not shoot at the guy? And I guess at that stage, if you just parachute into the stage where there's already a shooter in the school, there's very little else I could see them doing. But it'll be really interesting to find out with what weapons, I'd like to know, did police return fire. There was, of course, initial speculation. Because it was a school shooting, everybody, and the shooter was reported to have shown up with a long gun, as they said in the news immediately, without any more specifics. There was a lot of assumption that meant an AR-15, and it turned out to be a shotgun. He showed up with a shotgun and a .38 pistol, and it'll be pretty easy to figure out who got hit by a shotgun or a .38. It'll be a different story if the cops heard school shooting, long gun, and showed up at the scene with their SWAT gear, and that would mean their own AR-15s. And recall that, as in Parkland, the school resource officers were overly concerned, perhaps, and didn't even, in some cases, enter the school because they thought they were outgunned, and they were. The shooter had an AR-15, and they didn't. So sometimes the police responding to these situations come with AR-15s, and maybe that's something that needs to be given a little bit of thought, by the way. I mean, I know they don't want to be outgunned, and they are very frequently facing shooters with AR-15s, so they feel like they need to be equally gunned. But the weapons they normally have, their sidearms, are designed for stopping power, and the AR-15 is designed for destruction power. And I guess if you're going to have a shootout in a crowded school, as much as you don't want to be outgunned, you really have to start thinking about, if I miss, I mean, it's better to miss with a 38 than an AR-15. It just is. The damage done to bystanders is considerably less, and I bet that there's been almost zero thought given to that. And I wonder whether they now think that police hit bystanders because they showed up with AR-15 style, that is to say, catastrophic wounds, whereas it's certainly no picnic getting shot, period. But firing into a crowd, say, with a shotgun and 38, unless you're close to point blank, doesn't do anything like the damage that an AR-15 can do from a distance. And I wonder whether there'll be some review after the fact about whether or not it's appropriate to respond to a shooting with cops armed with AR-15s if they're going to be in a crowded situation. I have some questions. We'll see in the next couple of days whether any details develop and we're proven right, once again, as sometimes or frequently happens in these situations. All right, now on with the rest of our roundup for the day. Some more important news, though equally ridiculous. Greg Dworkin is with us. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. I don't know that it's more important, but I will take this opportunity to mention that the idea that teachers should be armed and that's the answer to the problem.
Well, yeah.
Law enforcement, trained law enforcement, the statistics I saw hit their targets like 30% of the time.
Yes, and that's
why would you think part-time teacher marksmen are going to do any better?
Because they're awesome.
The targets that you hit might well be the people you're trying to save. That happens too with cops.
Definitely true. I mean, that's the calculus that goes into this is always, well, let's parachute into the situation, of a shooting is going on. What do you do? Wouldn't you rather have? And a lot of people are able to say, well, okay, I'd rather have somebody there, but they don't consider what happens in the meantime, and they don't really consider, well, what happens in the gun battle if you miss.
Like what could go wrong? You remember the whole thing about the movie shooting in Colorado?
Oh.
What happens if you have your trusty firearm that you didn't drop and leave under the seat, and it's dark, and somebody is shooting, and so you go ahead and do what? Start shooting in the dark? Who are you going to hit?
Yeah. And
if you hit anybody, if you don't shoot yourself in the foot, if you didn't drop your gun under the chair, who are you going to hit?
I mean, the school thing certainly obvious. I mean, even if it doesn't turn out to be the case in this instance that anybody was hit by police fire, clearly the worry that it happened. I mean, if your solution to this, and it's literally, there's really no other way to put it. And I mean, it's a spin, but it's a correct one to say, how could the answer to, the cops may have hit some additional kids in this fire. And by the way, it was like 10, 15 minutes. Nobody hit the shooter. Nobody. So that's
teachers were armed,
not
they would
effective.
have hit the shooter.
Yeah, sure, because they're teachers, right? They would be doing the trigonometry correctly, and they would have hit the guy. Maybe the math teachers would be better shots. I don't know, but in order to, I don't know what would motivate anyone to do it, except possibly mania or maybe getting paid. But how you say, well, we're a little worried that we might have hit some students. However, I think I can fix this. More guns, less training. Now, honestly,
I'm just saying, you have to step back and look at what could go wrong, because in this scenario, like if you have this particular scenario at OK Corral High School,
yes,
what could go wrong? Well, a lot.
You could hit one of the letters on the sign, and it might end up, people would be like, "What's the CK Corral? That doesn't make any sense." Anything can go wrong. Things usually do go wrong. Plenty has already gone wrong with armed teachers who didn't have a school shooting going on at all, but accidentally fired their weapons.
Or lose them.
Yeah, lose them.
Or leave them in the bathroom. That's a good one.
Oh, yeah. A very popular thing. But yeah, even if you just teleport directly to the situation, nobody's hitting the shooter. They're hitting other people. And, adding more people with guns, firing from different angles, and no coordination and no communication between them and the police who are maybe firing from the other side of the hallway. And you got to guess that teachers who teach full-time are just going to be less trained than the police who actually are police full-time. You can train all you want, but I don't think they're training as much as the cops do. And there are some gun enthusiasts who insist they train more than cops. But how many of them are teachers? Probably none.
A couple.
And they're probably also wrong.
And that doesn't necessarily mean they'll do any better. But
fall down the stairs.
Leaving that aside, because I think we'll get more to that as more of the story comes out. And these days, it takes a long time for a lot of the details to come out in this stuff.
I don't think we should have to wait. We just go.
Well, again,
I don't wait. I just automatically attracted to
so
it.
we're filling that gap.
Okay.
I have some broad themes today I want to cover in the remaining time I have.
Excellent. I love broads.
On this earth. Damon Runyon style, right? Broad themes. Primaries, yesterday.
Yes.
What happens in November.
Right.
The Trump mob grifting big picture, which includes the retroprobe. And then North Korea and South Korea.
Okay.
Which one do you want to do? Let's do primaries.
Yes.
That was fun.
I like the way you ask.
Well, whatever it is, I'll interrupt you. So
it's my home life. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing.
The whole idea here is
yes.
There was some fantastic primaries going on yesterday, some really interesting ones.
Yes.
And the big theme, Democratic voters reject tradition, choosing outsiders in their quest to regain power. That from the Washington Post, Michael Schur and David Weigel. Fresh faces with compelling life stories prevailed in Democratic primaries across several southern states Tuesday, beating candidates with deeper political pedigrees and more governing experience in several key races.
Okay. I mean, what would you need experience with this for?
It is absolutely the year of the women here. And I have a graph that I put up in the pundit roundup somewhere in one of the comments that Dave Hopkins, a political scientist, put together, showing that if you're looking for non-incumbent Democrats running in the primaries this year, a full 50% of non-incumbent Democrats running are women. That's just a nominal number.
It's the number. It's the expected value, actually. But yes, that's a good thing that we have.
I just
stumbled
added
into
that to the bottom of the list there, so you could take a look. The list is getting a little difficult to read because it's decided that Twitter is just going to be Twitter, and it's not really going to show you what it is that I just sent. So you have to click
Skype.
on this.
Yeah. Okay.
Skype.
I see. And it just right. It used to show you the photo of either.
Monday did. It showed you the photo of what I was sending today.
Yeah, now it just says Twitter. Well, okay.
Because they're always tweaking it to fix it, right? And they're just making it harder and harder for us to use this as a vehicle. So it turns out that Republicans, not so much. Whether incumbent or non-incumbent, there's less women running on the Republican side. It was only 10% anyway. Now it's down to about 9%.
Huh. That's interesting.
And then in the Democratic side, even if you're an incumbent, you're in the 40-45%. But if you're a non-incumbent, you're up in the 50% range. So a lot of women running and a lot of women winning. And let me highlight 3 of them because I think they're all interesting stories. All right. Let's start with Kentucky 6.
6.
And this is where Amy McGrath, who is definitely an outsider, won her primary against the male mayor of Lexington, Kentucky, and a politician. She's not a politician. You know what she is? She's a Marine.
Oh.
She lands planes on aircrafts, and she was doing that for 20 years. Aircraft. And she's had this great ad that she introduced herself to everybody with called Told Me, where she's sitting what looks like in front of an F-16 that she flew. And she says, they told me at age 13 I couldn't do this, and I wrote my congressman, and they said women should be protected, and they're not really for combat. And I wrote Mitch McConnell, and he never answered me. But I got in, and I did this, and I was the first woman pilot, and I did this for a long time, and I landed on aircrafts. They told my mother, who had polio, that she couldn't do anything. She went to medical school, and there's a whole bunch of people telling us we can't win in Kentucky, and we'll see.
Okay. Well,
she wins, and it's a really compelling ad, a compelling story, and we'll see how she did. But the interesting part of it isn't just that she won. This piece from Think Progress and a Steve Kornacki tweet. The title is Massive Democratic turnout in rural Kentucky propels progressive Amy McGrath to upset victory. She beat out Lexington Mayor Jim Gray, who started the race as a strong favorite and had the encouragement of the National Party. And Gray will endorse her, and there's not much of a civil war there. But she was the outsider, and Kornacki notes huge Democratic turnout jump in rural Kentucky's 6 counties from Clinton Sanders in 16, that was the primary, to now. In Nicholas County, votes cast in 16, 835, tonight 1622. In Robertson County, 16 had 295 votes, tonight 699. And in Bath, 2016 had 1369, and tonight 2608. So people showed up. They showed up in bigger numbers than they did for the 2016 presidential primary 2 years ago. And this all gets, we'll get to this when we talk about what happens in November. But people are showing up, and people are showing up in big numbers, and that's all good for the Democrats.
All right.
Big story, of course, in Georgia was that the black female Stacey won over the white female Stacey, the battle of the Stacys.
Yeah, all right.
And Stacey Abrams is going to be the candidate for governor. That doesn't mean she wins, of course. It's Georgia.
She's going to win.
But she could become the country's first black female governor if elected in November. And that's another fresh face with a compelling life story.
Freshness.
Let's see what happens. In Texas, Democrats nominated 2 lesbian candidates with military or law enforcement backgrounds, one Latina, the other Filipina, for key races. And the other thing that happened was that there was a grudge match, I suppose, between 2 candidates in Texas 7, Laura Moser versus Lizzie Fletcher. Lizzie Fletcher was more the establishment, and Moser was the upstart, and not supported by the DCCC. And Lizzie Fletcher won and beat Moser. And Moser says the key objective here is to beat John Culberson, that's the Republican. If this night turns out like it's going to turn out, I encourage everybody to support Lizzie Fletcher.
All right.
And Will Jordan notes, losing Dem in the most widely covered Civil War Democratic primary immediately endorses the victorious fellow Dem. So not much of a civil war there. I know that the media loves to do Democrats in disarray, but that's not how it's working out. Mm-hmm. So those were, I think, the marquee elections from yesterday, and they're all really interesting because these are all really interesting people.
Yeah, I would say so. That's it's a pretty good roundup, that's for sure. And I see the photo of McGrath in front of the aircraft. Yeah, Marines cool. Would fly something else. It's not F-16. Is that one of those Harriers that goes that takes off vertically? Very cool.
I think she says in her ad she was the first woman to fly one in combat.
Okay, well that's pretty cool. It's I guess
it's like talking about whether it's a magazine or ammunition or stuff like that. Now you're not qualified to talk about the election.
All right. Oh gosh. Now, what am I going to do now? I've obviated the whole first segment of the show just because I can't identify which plane it is. But
I don't know which plane it is.
It's a good one.
I know she's a Marine, and I know there's no such thing as an ex-Marine, and that's the important thing.
That's what they say. Well, I think those Harriers that take off vertically are pretty cool. That would be, any kind of combat
when they
pilot.
work, they're fantastic.
Right. Those Ospreys are the ones that are a problem.
So there's this Time magazine article that came out just before. Molly Ball writing.
Okay.
In Time, and the title is "Who's Winning the Democrat Civil War?" And the answer is the Democrats.
Oh, well, yeah, automatically. Great.
Well,
I hadn't thought of it that way. Okay.
I mean, it's always about, like, who's fighting. It's not really like that. When you have primaries, you're going to have people on different sides. You come together, and then you beat the opponent. No big deal. I know it's boring, but that's what's happening.
Oh. Okay.
Right? So that's what happened in the primaries, and how does that figure for November? There's an interesting switch in the narrative this week. This is the week of, maybe there won't be a Democratic blue wave after all. And I'll give you the reasons for why people are starting to say that, which doesn't necessarily make it true, but that's why they're starting to say it.
Okay.
And a lot of it has to do with California. And to illustrate that, here's a piece David Wasserman writing in the Cook Political Report. House ratings changes, GOP fortunes improve in 4 districts. This at a time that the Republicans are in disarray, couldn't pass a farm bill, or arguing about whether or not they should try to oust Paul Ryan early or late, and have decided, for various and sundry reasons that we might mention in the segment, that they're going to run even harder to the right on immigration in order to win. So things are not going all that well for them in that regard. But the generic ballot is tightening. And in this particular piece, Dave Wasserman highlights why people are worried about California. House ratings changes, GOP fortunes improve in 4 districts.
Okay. 4.
Everywhere else it was, okay, this is now moving in the Democratic direction, but not this time. After a rough start to the year, House Republicans are suddenly feeling less pessimistic about their fall prospects. At the macro level, robust economic data and positive developments on the Korean Peninsula have helped lift President Trump's approval rating to 42%. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, first of all.
That's inoperative, all right?
It is inoperative because the whole Korean thing has fallen apart, and the idiot press who keeps trying to play this as a Trump win are looking incredibly foolish. We'll have more to say about that. That was our last point about Korea. But Charles Franklin had a wonderful piece. He tweeted, it's one of those tweets in there that you probably can't find at this point.
Look for Twitter.
That talks about the narrowness. I have it in the pundit roundup.
Okay.
The narrowness of the Trump margin. And just for ease of administration and looking, I'll just throw it at the very, very bottom here.
All right,
so you
I'll
can
have a
find
look
it.
at it. Oh, look,
And
it says
we'll
Twitter.
do it after the break, but the idea is that Trump's ceiling and Trump's floor are very close to each other, and so his numbers don't really change.
Okay. Well, I thought he was a really good builder, but apparently not. He puts the floor and ceiling too close together.
Yeah, there's no room for him.
there's very rarely any room for him, to be honest.
It's an eensy-beensy building.
He can put his hands in, though. That's good news. All right, we'll be right back after this short break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Greg and I having some fun during the break looking at the graph he was just telling us about. It started off as a story about having the least dynamic approval range. Is that
He
right?
doesn't change.
Yeah.
You know? He goes from 38 to 42.
Yeah.
Oh, he's all the way up to 42. Oh my goodness! One poll said he's 43.
Wow.
That's still traditionally low. I mean, people like Harry Truman or George W. Bush had a vastly wide range of how people felt about them.
Yes. I see that it's a very interesting chart that they've put together,
and it's all like for the first 479 days. So they didn't even talk about how George W. Bush's approval plummeted.
Oh,
really? This is all just in the first year and a half.
Have to do it that way, I guess, so that it's apples to apples. But boy, yes. I mean, yeah, that's a pretty wide range. So there's these boxes that I guess represent 50% of the polls, and then there are the outlier polls are marked by these higher and lower lines above it. So I mean, yeah, there's you have a what would we say here, 80, 90 down to about 45. So a 45-point range
for W.
For W.
Yeah, and you're talking about a 4-point range for Trump.
Yes.
So that's just to illustrate the fact that Democrats hate him and they're not changing, and Republicans are accepting of him. And so if his approval rating goes up and down, it's typically due to the Republicans, not the Democrats. The Democrats all hate him.
Okay.
So anyway, so I don't know that Trump, his numbers improving. They're not really improving. And the Korean stuff making things better for the Republican. That was like 2 days ago. So that's not true anymore. It was never true. But the press is now coming around to realizing that maybe they overhyped this whole Korean summit thing. In any case, what Wasserman talks about the fact is that it's important to remember that voter intensity matters as much as presidential approval in a generic ballot, and Republicans can't point to hard election data that proves their base has suddenly closed the intensity gap. It was just 4 weeks ago that Arizona Democrat Hirel Teperney came within 5 points of winning a district Trump won by 21 points in 2016. Amy Walter, by the way, points out in the same Cook Political Report, different article, that don't look at margins. Margins are not to be looked at in a vacuum. You got to put them in context. For example, if somebody's leading another candidate by 10 points, that sounds like they have a lead. But what if it's 31-21?
Oh.
And the 31 is the incumbent.
Oh, okay.
That doesn't mean much at all. It's actually a bad number. What if it's 42-32? Again, if you're the incumbent at 42, that's bad. So it isn't just the margin. It's also the whole idea of what the absolute number is. And with all of that, California has a June 5th primary coming up, and it's the single highest stakes primary of the year. With 2 weeks to go, Democrats are still at some risk of getting locked out by the top two primary in several key districts, particularly 39, 48, and 49. Our newest ratings place all three of those seats as toss-up, although it's possible the districts could shift back to Democrats' favor depending upon the primary results. Overall, there's 8 Republicans retiring from districts Hillary Clinton carried in 2016, and that's generally an opportunity for, like, the Democrats, for example.
Yeah.
But the top two primary could change that. So there's two in particular, California 39, which is an open seat with Royce retiring, and California 49 with Darrell Issa. That looks like an open seat too. And both of them are going from lean D to toss-up because they're still trying to figure out the mechanisms of the jungle primary where the top two go on to the general election. So those are situations where the Democrats might blow an opportunity, a good opportunity to pick up a seat, 2 seats. Overall, however, Wasserman says, we believe Democrats could pick up anywhere between 20 to 40 seats, and they need 23.
Okay. Well,
because of all the toss-ups. So, there's still a very reasonable chance that they could win. But what are the dynamics going on? It's not Trump's approval rating. It's not the Korea stuff, which is going to win. Ron Brownstein has his finger on that. Basically, white voters are just so solidly Republican that, and we talked about this in terms of the generic ballot on Monday, the Democratic line doesn't change, but the Republican line goes up and down. And as the Republican line goes up, as reluctant Republicans come home, then the gap narrows. And then when they get frustrated, then the gap widens again. We'll see what happens with Korea and with the Mueller investigation as it metastasizes. I mean, now we're talking about Trump corruption and the Middle East, not just Russia. So we'll see how all of that plays. But the whole idea there is that whites are so solidly behind Republicans that it's difficult for the Democrats to overcome that because there's just more white people in this country than there are minorities. And again, it's all about showing up. If the millennial voters show up, and they traditionally don't in midterms, and if suburban women, including white women, vote for Democrats, then they can win. But minorities have to show up, millennials have to show up, and suburban moderate Republicans have to vote for the Democrat. If those things happen, as they did in Virginia, it all came together there, then the Democrat wins by a larger margin than people thought. And that just helps to put polls in perspective in terms of what actually happens on the ground. Then I guess there was a Reuters poll which showed that the generic ballot had suddenly flipped to G+6, to Republicans +6.
Oh.
Now, that's probably an outlier. If it were really Republican +6, we'd be talking about a Republican red wave not happening. That's not what we see on the ground. But since the media loves to talk about horse race, and they like it if it's, closer, that's certainly going to be something that they're going to harp on. So the idea that, the narrative has changed is something we have to report. And they should report. I mean, there's no reason not to report it. But you have to put all of that in context in terms of looking at what it all means for November. G. Elliott Morris, the political scientist who tracks all of this, still has Republicans, at a disadvantage, but not a big one. We're talking about 55, 56, 57% chance of Democrats winning in the fall. And that's not a guarantee. It's not a lock. It never was. You have to go out, do the work, get people to the polls, and people have to show up, and they have to vote. So far they have. But they have to do it in November for the Democrats to win the House and possibly the Senate. Is it possible that Republicans keep both houses? Yes, absolutely it's possible. But that's if our side doesn't show. Again, so far we are showing. And that rural Democratic win for Amy McGrath, I think, is a good example of how it's working so far.
Okay. So far. And it's encouraging, certainly, but we're only halfway through the game at this point.
Right, but we're also only halfway through the Mueller probe.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and so there's so many other things that happen between now and then. That's why it's, you don't get too excited about it. Adam Serwer followed up on a bunch of other stories that were similar in the same way. I think Adam Davidson, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, saying, we're getting to the end game where everybody's realizing Trump is really this corrupt.
Yes, all the
and Adam Serwer has a piece in The Atlantic, which is called "There's Only One Trump Scandal."
Yes, the grand unifying theory.
The grand unifying theory of political evolution here.
Okay.
There's weak forces and strong forces, and then there's only one Trump scandal. The myriad Trump scandals can obscure the fact that they're all elements of one massive tale of corruption. The sheer volume of scandals can seem difficult to track. Of just reading this paragraph is amazing. There's the ongoing special counsel investigation into whether the Trump campaign aided a Russian campaign to aid Trump's candidacy and defeat his Democratic rival. By the way, James Clapper said that's exactly what happened and that the Russians threw the election. There's the associated inquiry into whether the president obstructed justice when he fired former FBI Director James Comey, whom he had asked not to investigate his former national security advisor. There's the president's hush money payments to women, with whom he allegedly had extramarital affairs made through his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, and facilitated by corporate cash paid to influence the White House. There's his ongoing effort to interfere with the Russia inquiry, the foreign governments that seem to be utilizing the president's properties as vehicles for influencing administration policy, the emerging evidence that Trump campaign officials sought aid not only from Russia, but from other countries, which may have affected Trump's foreign policy, and ongoing revelations of the president's cabinet officials misusing taxpayer funds, the accumulating evidence that administration decisions are made at the behest of private industry, in particular those in whom Republican donors have significant interests. Any one of those things would be grounds for impeachment, by the way. So the preceding wall of text may appear as an abridged list of the Trump scandals, but it's an illusion. Viewed as such, the various Trump scandals can be seen multifarious and overpowering and difficult to fathom, but there are not many Trump scandals. There is one Trump scandal, singular: the corruption of the American government by the president and his associates, who are using their official power for personal and financial gain rather than for the welfare of the American people. And then he goes on and gives specific examples. One great one is the president's attempt to aid the Chinese telecom company ZTE, hours after the Chinese government approved funding for a project in the vicinity of a Trump property in Indonesia. Even the Senate committee said, no, you can't do that. They're putting a brake on that.
Oh, we'll see.
But in all these cases, the president or one of his associates was seeking a profit, personally or financially, from their official duties and powers. I mean, you step back and look at the big picture here, and you realize that what happened is that Trump never figured he'd win, and he was doing this to get connections, and he was making himself available. He was open for business. He's, as the press likes to politely say, transactional, which is a lovely way of saying he's corrupt as, all get out. I can't say it on the air.
Okay.
And so the transactional president was open for business. Everybody knew this, and they all trying to get close to him or Kushner or his daughter Ivanka. because if they get rich, they get to play. This is pay to play.
Yeah.
And pay to play is fairly simple to understand.
Yes.
And so that's the whole big picture here. And it started before the election because Trump didn't figure he'd win. So what's the harm? This is how you do business in New York. It's just the way real estate works.
Yeah.
So I don't understand
true.
what the big problem is here. And then he accidentally gets elected because the Russians actually had more influence than anybody thought. And what Comey did really hurt. And Clinton loses to everybody's surprise. And Trump says, well, whatever. We'll just keep doing what we're doing because it got us here. And so he continues to be corrupt. And that's where we're at now. That's what Mueller's investigating. And, we'll see how that all plays out. The fascinating thing to me is those numbers about Republicans being okay with it and coming home and deciding that, I just don't really care about the Russian investigation, or I just don't, it's all so confusing. I don't want to hear any more of this. I heard, I can't pronounce her name either, Danielle Pletka, who's at AEI but was a former foreign policy analyst in the various Republican administrations.
Okay.
And she's on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. And Cornell Belcher, who's a Democratic pollster, is talking about the fact that Trump is just so corrupt to the bone that it's part of every single thing he does and every word he says and every move he makes and all that sort of stuff.
Write a song.
And Pletka's reaction was fascinating because it's the reaction of the typical Republican voter. She said, yeah, but what about the Clinton Foundation?
I don't know.
And Belcher just lost it. I said, what are you talking about? Then she said, I'm not saying it's the same. But the whole idea here is that the Clintons were open for business too, and what's the difference?
I guess the presidency.
Well, yeah. Well, Belcher said Clinton wasn't president. She was never president. The foundation did never anything like this ever. It's not the same. It's not being investigated. It's not a crime. And Pletka said, yeah, but it sounds similar. And what I'm saying is not that she was correct or not that she's logical. I'm saying this is how Republican voters hear all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating to just get a sense of, really, this is the way you look at all of this? Because this is like whataboutism at the grandest scale. And so, the cognitive dissonance is when you don't want to hear something, you don't hear it. And how do you protect yourself from hearing bad stuff? And how do you put pencils in your ears and decide that despite that whole paragraph I read of all the different Trump scandals, you're not really aware of any? Well, Clinton Cash, New York Times said that Clinton Foundation was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But they didn't. Fox News says they did.
I guess they say that. And I mean, it's interesting because, as you're saying, cognitive dissonance and putting pencils in your ear, they probably assume that Democrats are the ones you're talking about. How can you hear about the Clinton Foundation and not see the parallels? And I will say, you just said Nazi right there. I caught you. I knew
right.
it.
I caught you.
But, I mean, one big difference is, well, she's not the president, and so we don't actually have to worry about that at the moment. So why not turn our attention, having defeated that problem?
One big difference is the indictments and the guilty pleas. That's why I maintain that the
one.
Mueller probe matters so much more than all this other stuff.
Well, we would have them if we had an investigation. We might, but I mean...
you did. You looked at Benghazi, and Congress had all the time in the world to look at everything they wanted, and they didn't come up with anything.
If you started all over again and did it from a corrupt standpoint, though, with Donald Trump dictating the outcome, wouldn't we have a different story?
No, because they were in the majority when they looked at Benghazi and all this other stuff.
Yes,
and
but they didn't have crazy Donald Trump just saying, to hell with your findings, execute her. And
they had Jason Chaffetz and they had Devin Nunes still looking at this stuff. They
those
still
two
didn't
guys.
come up with anything.
Yeah, right. Well, what you need is 435 Donald Trumps in Congress, and then
then that would be a different story.
Yeah, well, I mean, in addition to having looked and found nothing, it's like, well, when it's a problem is when that person is in power, and she's not, and you are, and now we have to look.
So the narrative on the Trump side is easy to see. The Clintons do it too, and the only reason that you're confused about this is the deep state is trying to fool you.
Yes, so deep.
And on the other side, it's look how complicated the Mueller probe is. There's so many different aspects to it. And until it comes together and they actually get their final report, we don't really know what's going on. And those, in terms of competing narratives, yes. I mean, obviously the Trump side is easier.
Yeah, I guess so. In terms of I'm right and they're wrong. Well, that is easier to understand.
So that's why it's so interesting that when you look at how Democrats are running in the primaries and ultimately how they're going to run in the fall, this gets to the whole debate about do you run against Trump or do you run on local issues like what the Trump administration is doing to healthcare in your area. That's what Amy McGrath is running on. And part of the reason that they just don't run on Trump and impeachment is that it's a difficult story to put together, as I just tried to outline in this Adam Serwer piece. So there's reasons why it's going to be what do Democrats stand for? They stand for health care being taken away from you by Republicans and your premiums going up. And by the way, corruption in government. But not necessarily running on we need to impeach Donald Trump because of all the different reasons he is worthy of being impeached. That's a narrative that's difficult to sell, particularly in areas that voted for Trump, because it's just too complicated at this point. That doesn't mean that it's going to stay complicated. Once Mueller comes out with more evidence, indictments, and clear examples that are spelled out in a nonpartisan way, about the fact that Trump actually is corrupt, that will change. But until that happens, the whole impeachment thing is something that Democrats are going to have to dance around, and this is why.
Well, there's never going to be a day when a report comes out that highlights all of the wrongs that Donald Trump has done that is considered bipartisan or nonpartisan.
Let's just say Kushner gets indicted.
Okay.
That's just so crystal clear. You don't really have to worry about the whole rest of it.
Yeah, because he can jettison Kushner and say, I don't know, I'm not corrupt. Right. I don't know who he is. He's Ivanka's coffee boy as far as I knew.
Yeah. And what if Ivanka gets indicted? That'd be fun.
She's a coffee girl.
Well, she is him and he is her. So
why does he hate coffee?
It's going to be very difficult to separate
that is the big question.
From the Trumps.
Yeah, and I don't think he drinks any coffee, and he's got more coffee boys and girls, I guess, than I know what to do with, and he doesn't drink coffee. So this is very odd, all in all.
All right. Well, Jared Kushner is Trump's cheeseburger boy. That's basically
that we can understand.
That you can understand.
Right. And cheeseburgers are not kosher.
Again, it seems complicated now, but I just have a feeling that as it all comes together, it's going to be a whole lot less complicated. And all the plots are going to be woven together into a clear ending.
Yeah.
But it's just going to take some time. And then finally, before I go, a little bit about North Korea here. This is a thread by Elon Goldenberg looking at the whole summit thing and how it's breaking out. As someone who is part of diplomatic talks, this story on how Trump team screwed up China negotiations is a textbook case of nearly every single thing you should not do, and it bodes badly for the North Korea summit.
Bad boding.
Now he's talking about the China negotiations, where Mnuchin and Peter Navarro go over, start arguing about the positions of the Trump administration while they're there in front of their Chinese counterparts, and then come back and say, okay, it didn't go well.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Right, so let's pick it apart by grueling step. And the story he cites is from the New York Times. Chances of China trade win undercut by Trump team infighting. Everything is always about a Trump win. Trump is not winning. He's not winning on North Korea, and he's not winning on China. And that's the wrong way to look at it and the wrong way to frame it, but they insist on it. Anyway, before the talks, you fail to prepare. You don't have sufficient deliberations to come to a common negotiating position as a team. This is where you need an engaged president to listen to the disagreements among the team and set guidance. Of course, Trump won't do that during the talks because you fail to prepare, have profanity-laced shouting matches amongst yourselves in front of the Chinese, encouraging them to exploit splits in the U.S. team. And here he cites a piece that says he and Mr. Navarro, that's Mnuchin, he and Mr. Navarro stepped outside to engage in a profanity-laced shouting match, an unmistakable demonstration to the Chinese of their deep differences of opinions. Mr. Mnuchin sought to play down tensions between the officials, saying on CNBC that Mr. Navarro was an important part of the team. So back to Mr. Goldenberg. So he says, have the president publicly tweet sensitive concessions he plans to make, causing a backlash in Congress that shuts down those options before they've even been offered. Now you've taken away your negotiating space. And here the citation is what I just told you. The Sunday before the Chinese arrived, Mr. Trump said on Twitter he might rethink the company's punishment in return for trade concessions as ZTE, the big Chinese telecommunications company, and as a personal favor to Mr. Xi. But by the time Mr. Liu touched down last week in Washington, the president's statement had provoked a fierce backlash in Congress, and the politics around ZTE had shifted. Back to Mr. Goldenberger. It also leaked China's concession to the press, causing them to have to deny the concessions, forcing the Chinese to take a harder line. Now you've taken away your counterpart's negotiating space. And then further citation, whatever the motivation, the leaks ignited a backlash from the Chinese. On Thursday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry denied that it had offered to reduce its trade surplus by $200 billion. On Friday, the state-run People's Daily labeled the reports a misunderstanding because China, as a concession, had offered to help with American imports and ease the trade war. And the blunt discussion by Trump about ZTE and then the backlash in Congress caused the Chinese to remove that from the table. Then, after the talks fail, have various members of the team come out with different positions that publicly criticize the results of the negotiations in each other, because that sends a good signal before the next negotiating round. And to top it off with a front-page New York Times story where clearly many of the U.S. negotiators disparaged each other to the press, because I'm sure they'll now work really well as a team going forward. Good luck with the North Korea summit. Glad we got rid of JCPOA, that's the Iran deal, to negotiate a better deal. And, of course, we'll get the ultimate deal in Israel-Palestine. God help us all. And, by the way, diplomatic negotiations on tough issues are really, really hard. Even without all these basic unforced errors, the likelihood of success is low. With these errors, it's impossible.
Uh-oh.
So that's our negotiating team. And the whole idea that the press is treating the coin that Trump minted in honor of the summit that may not happen, and the whole idea that everybody's optimistic that everything is going to go well, it was just stupid to begin with. And now the stories, of course, are, oh, well, Trump is having second thoughts about it. Can he salvage the summit? No, he can't. The summit was a stupid idea. You can't salvage a stupid idea. So, well, how can he twist this so it's a win? Because he said he would walk away, and therefore he's doing just what he told us that he would do. Look, he screwed up. Why don't you just call it what it is, press, media? This is an inept president who doesn't know what he's doing, who was at risk for having an incredibly bad summit. He's already elevated North Korea and given them what they wanted. They're not going to give him anything. And stop trying to play it as Trump trying to maneuver so he can win. It's not a win. And for Dave Wasserman to write about how Republican chances have improved because the macro environment is how well things are going with the Koreas, it's just dumb.
Well, yes. I imagine most people are not paying that much attention to the Korea thing, but I don't know. It's not that hard to distill out of it. Well, it might not happen. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't.
What happened to Trump's Nobel, the Peace Prize? Didn't he get that already?
It's on hold. Oh, no, yeah, he already got it. There you go. That's the answer. I already won. I just don't need a second one.
Yeah, we're moving on to the next thing.
Who needs a second?
So the incredulity, the idea that you give Trump the benefit of the doubt on anything at this point, after what he's done over the past year and a half, just astounds me. He's a liar. Everything he says is a lie. You better prove even the time of day when he talks about it. And don't assume that because the Trump administration says X, that X is any kind of verifiable fact.
Yeah. Just
don't take that assumption. Don't take that stance. These are not wins.
Yeah, true. They're just so, that's what they deal in.
That's what they do. That's how they handle the presidency. White House Correspondents' Dinner. They've learned nothing.
I guess.
They've learned nothing from Iraq, which is the frustrating part.
Yeah, I mean, really, we're well past the point where we just should simply see things as wins and losses, but that's what they do in normal times, and then they keep writing, okay, we know it's not normal, so then why do you keep the normal score. It was a bad idea when things were normal to keep score this way. It's even worse now.
That's what we do, and that's how we're trained. Anyway, I'm going
to
end this short section, which is
consider that
already
a loss.
gone over long. But thanks so much for having me on. We'll be back tomorrow, and maybe we'll pick up on some of this and go from there.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. Well, who knows what will happen
This is
tomorrow.
my friend Greg Dorkin talking with my friend David Wollman, Kagro in the morning, because he's right. You never know what we're going to do. We'll see.
Even we don't know. We don't even know who we are, quite honestly, at this point.
But we do know what day it is.
Yes. All right. Very good. Thanks. That we can keep track of. And that might be all we can salvage out of this. Thanks, Greg. Let's see where to go after this. Well, there's so much happening on here. Here's a story there's a million things we got to get to. There's a couple things here. Lots more on Michael Cohen. People doing yet more digging, and there's yet another person flipping, I guess is the term everybody wants to use. And this time it's from the taxi medallion world. I don't know how useful that will be in the probe of Donald Trump himself, but since the two of them very frequently intimately tied their illegal activities to one another, I suppose there's some promise of some benefit from that. A big shoe drops in the Mueller probe as the taxi king flips, reports the Washington Post. We'll read something about that. And by the way, how about this headline? Everyone loves this one. Hey, look, more evidence that Elliot Brody, may have been covering for Trump in that Playmate affair. Always exciting to see that develop, and interesting to see what that new evidence is. And, of course, yesterday, big story that we didn't discuss at all today, which is probably indicative of the lack of press on it, even though it's one of those stories that the press sometimes gets outraged about because it's an affront against the press. The EPA, Scott Pruitt's organization, can you believe it, barring AP, the Associated Press, and CNN from an EPA summit meeting on contaminants, ejecting them from the place just outright, and just taking them and shoving the reporters back out the door. Really amazing. And yet, no serious backlash just yet. It's only been a day. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I am reliably informed, even without the L inserted in there, by Kate Sherrill, who has two to spare, L's that is, says the EPA thing is an ongoing situation. Apparently, Emily Holden, a reporter for Politico, tweets just now, I guess, let's see, right a couple of minutes ago. I'm standing at EPA's Chemicals Summit, where I'm told by security that I can't enter and can't stand inside because it is invite only and no press. They were polite today, but refused to call the public affairs staff, even if I gave them the number, which they said they didn't have. So security says, just call the press representatives, the public affairs staff. Don't know anything about that. Never heard of them. Have you got the number? Yes, I do. I have it for you right here. Well, I'm not calling them even if you do. It's been pretty interesting. I saw, who was it? Glenn Thrush, I think, yesterday tweeting that this was a big deal and the press was going to react. And we do from time to time, pardon me, hear or see press backlash when the press is targeted by the Trump administration or, anybody really. But this time, not so much. I'm pretty sure that it will pass unremarked upon for the most part. I mean, it's been reported. You can't deny that. I'm going to read you an account of it from the press. But nothing like what, I don't know. I don't know what you've come to expect at this point. Except lots of nothing. And I guess if you expected that, you got your wish. Let's see. This is yesterday's story from the AP, which is one of the organizations banned from the summit. The latest, they say, EPA bars AP CNN from summit on contaminants. The latest on a hearing with EPA Chief Scott Pruitt on a widespread contaminant in drinking water. That's what was going on, and they reported yesterday at 9:55, right about this time yesterday. The Environmental Protection Agency is barring the Associated Press, CNN, and the environmental-focused news organization E&E from a national summit on harmful water contaminants. Why have a national summit if the nation isn't invited? Because you're not looking for solutions to harmful water contaminants. You're looking for ways to make it easier for people who contaminate water to get away with it and not get fined because business or something like that. The EPA blocked the news organizations from attending Tuesday's Washington meeting, convened by EPA Chief Scott Pruitt. EPA spokesman Jahan Wilcox told the barred organizations they were not invited and there was no space for them, but gave no indication of why they specifically were barred. Pruitt told about 200 people, because there's no space, at the meeting that dealing with the contaminants is, quote, a national priority. And it is in a way. Guards barred an AP reporter from passing through a security checkpoint inside the building. When the reporter asked to speak to an EPA public affairs person, the security guards, they weren't polite yesterday. They grabbed the reporter by the shoulders and shoved her forcibly out of the EPA building. Very, Putin-esque of them. And that sounds like, I'm not referring to puttanesca, the delicious Italian dish, but Vladimir Putin of the Russian president, in case you didn't know. If I were a news organization, I would link to his name with lots of stories about Vladimir Putin, just in case you didn't know who he was. Let's see. So, I guess that was the latest of the reports from yesterday. There was an earlier 9:25 a.m. filing that was reporting, I guess, what the event was. And then the news half an hour later was, we can't go to that event. Here they say EPA Chief Scott Pruitt says dealing with contaminated drinking water is a national priority. Pruitt spoke Tuesday as he opened a hearing on the contaminants known as, why did I get into this? Perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl. I'm guessing I've got something close to pronunciation right on that. The chemicals were used as items like non-stick coating and firefighting foam and have contaminated some water systems nationwide. The compounds are linked to developmental defects and other health problems. Are they the same or similar to, I know we've learned a lot about DuPont's non-stick coating and its contamination of groundwater and around its plants. And we read years ago, it seems like, I'm pretty sure it actually was years ago, about the widespread alarm about that chemical's ill effects. If it's a different one, it may very well be the same one. So and that was very dangerous sounding, and lots of, let's say at the very least, ineffective government, if not outright corruption, preventing the alarm from being raised properly about it and abatement being done in order to repair the damage. Pruitt has faced criticism in recent weeks over emails, showing the EPA sought to intervene in a critical study on those contaminants. Convening Tuesday's session, Pruitt is pledging to work on establishing a maximum allowable level for the chemicals in drinking water, like probably 100%. Representatives of states, tribes, the chemical industry, environmental groups, and others are attending the session. It's just that the AP and CNN are not allowed to do so, and Politico, I guess, got added to the list today. So an exciting development in the annals of EPA corruption, which is not to be viewed as separate from Trump corruption. It facilitates the entirety of it. As Adam Serwer said, there really is only one story here. All right, let's see. What else should we round up for today? Here's an extraneous story that I hadn't been following, but the tweet was so intriguing, I had to pass it on to the rest of you, and I noticed Chris Hayes found it equally intriguing. Paul Dickinson sends this one. He is, he describes himself in his Twitter bio as a defender of truth. That's good. Justice and the American way. They go together as a package. Ali Kinani's lawyer versus Blackwater. And that's the important part in all of this. Let's see. Here's the deal. My investigation, he says, found, and as we mentioned, in case you skimmed over that. I don't know who Ali Kenani is exactly, but apparently he needed a lawyer in a case against Blackwater, and we know who that was, by the way. Eric Prince, also much in the news for other things, although likely, just like there's only one Trump scandal, there's probably really only one Eric Prince scandal, and all of these various moving parts to it are one big thing, not several small ones. And none of the issues surrounding Blackwater are small, really. But Paul Dickinson, the lawyer, says I guess, yeah, okay, lawyer, yes. My investigation found that Blackwater guards in Iraq, they were trouble, right? They traded liquor, also bad, with the regular U.S. Army to obtain jacketed and armor-piercing rounds that the DOS, Department of State, I guess, since they remember, Blackwater at that point was there as outside contractors providing security for State Department personnel in the working on the provisional government in Iraq. So they had been prohibited by the Department of State in the terms of their contract from using jacketed and armor-piercing rounds in their weaponry. So they didn't have any, but they wanted some because they wanted to fire some at some Iraqis for various reasons. And so they got, the laws don't help anything, as you know. Laws don't prevent anything. Criminals will get their hands on guns anyway, and likewise, I guess they'll get their hands on jacketed and armor-piercing rounds as well, even if they're prohibited from having them. All they'll have to do is trade liquor with the regular U.S. Army, who will give away all that fantastic armament that makes the United States Armed Forces the finest fighting force in the world, in the history of the world. And if you give us some liquor, we'll help you become a little bit better as a fighting force as well. They gave them armor-piercing rounds, and these rounds were used during the Nisour Square shooting in which 9-year-old Ali Kenani, that's Paul Dickinson's client, was killed. So how interesting is that? Well, it's embarrassing, for one thing, and rather incriminating. And by the way, he has embedded Wendy Siegelman's tweet about the issue here, and I don't know who discovered what first, but Paul continues here by saying, I know this because I was the civil lawyer that represented Ali Kenani's family and others for injury and wrongful death claims against Blackwater and Eric Prince. The civil case was successfully litigated in the U.S. Some of the guards we sued were also criminally convicted for murder. Here's a thread on the outcome of the criminal charges after 3 of the sentences were overturned. And he points to one of his own Twitter threads here. Should we dive into it, or should I continue with this thread? It's a problem with threads embedding threads. We'll circle around back to it after this. Paul continues here, saying, my sources were at the highest level of the joint U.S. and Iraqi criminal investigation. Blackwater and Eric Prince knew that their guards were using unapproved ammunition. This Blackwater Ammunition Company is a dance on the graves of those killed by Blackwater. And now we're really talking about something. That's, I guess, what Wendy Siegelman was tweeting about when he included her tweet in the first one I read to you about that his investigation had uncovered some of this stuff. Wendy Siegelman, here we have to divert from the Twitter thread to go and look at her. She says it appears that Eric Prince's tarnished Blackwater brand, remember they rebranded 2 or 3 times, changed their name, right? Well, apparently there's still some cachet to the old name, Blackwater. They may be attempting a comeback with a new business launched in March of 2018 called Blackwater Ammunition, that to date has only been noticed by a few gun-related websites. And there's a short thread she puts together, she says about that. The About Us page of BlackwaterAmmo.com says, the idea of creating a new high-tech, high-quality, and revolutionary ammunition company came to Eric Prince and Nicola Bandini and James Fenech, I'm guessing F-E-N-E-C-H, experienced and prominent Maltese guns and ammunition distributor, has joined what? Has joined, I guess, the project. Here's the About Us page. I'll have to read that again because it didn't make any real sense. The idea of creating this new Revolutionary Ammunition Company came to Eric Prince and Nicola Bandini while traveling together in the Far East. There we are. From those exciting exchanges, James Fennick, experienced and prominent Maltese guns and ammunition distributor, has joined in, and in about 2 years, Blackwater Ammunition has come alive, and it is now facing the challenges of the global market. What? We have ammunition, and it is for sale. Our drive is quality, innovation, and precision. Our slogan, from professionals to professionals, means nothing more than the wish to deliver from a specific industry a performance that meets and exceeds users' needs and requirements. This, by the way, is just the worst gobbledygook copy I've ever seen. And this is a business website, and they clearly either didn't pay anybody to write this and scribbled it out themselves, and they're just so caught up in their own world. You know, these paramilitary types, just like police wannabe types and actual police along the way too. They love gobbledygook and jargon, and I guess it prevents them from communicating clearly. So basically, what are you going to say? Some good copy about this is, Eric, I like the opening, the idea of creating a new blah, blah, blah company, a revolutionary ammo company came to Eric Prince and Nicola Bandini while traveling together in the Far East. Okay, fine. From these exciting exchanges, something Maltese guns and ammunition distributor has been brought in to help them realize this vision. Why their vision of high-tech, high-quality ammo that was first conceived of in traveling in the Far East landed in Malta, I have no idea, but it did. Fine. There's a sort of foreign mystique to bringing in. It's interesting that they passed up the opportunity to have this ammunition made by Americans, for Americans, or whatever. Proudly made in the USA. Nope, we went to Malta on this. And then the gobbledygook. Profound professionals, two professionals, blah, blah, blah. And this one really means nothing. The wish to deliver from a specific industry, a performance that meets and exceeds users' needs and requirements. That's just basically called meeting the demands of a marketplace. But okay. We are driven by the wish to change an industry, that of metallic centerfire ammunition designing and manufacturing, that deals with the same processes since 120 years. Now I'm starting to think this was written by a Russian. What a piece of garbage this is. I mean, as a concept, it's a piece of garbage, but the copy is horrible. Read that again. We are driven by the wish to change an industry. Which industry? That of metallic centerfire ammunition designing and manufacturing. In other words, metallic centerfire ammunition. Obviously, if the industry is metallic centerfire ammunition, it involves designing and manufacturing and presumably selling it. Yes, we understand that as a given. Now, what's this mean? We'll take that out because it's set off by, it's set off by dashes. We are driven by the wish to change an industry that deals with the same processes since 120 years. That has dealt with the same processes, that has used the same manufacturing process for 120 years, I guess. In no other human endeavors, industrial processes have been absolutely identical for this length of time. I just read that verbatim. In no other human endeavors, industrial processes have been absolutely identical for this length of time. This cannot be any longer, and we are about to change it. I mean, it's heartbreaking for speakers of English to read that. Now, that's a screenshot. I wonder whether... Is there more? No, that's it. So that's genuinely what this allegedly American business has up on their About Us page. Wendy Siegelman, though, continues with her short thread on Blackwater ammo. On March 9th, 2018, Blackwater Ammunition launches global brand products and operations. And Prince, Bandini, and Fenech selected a firearms and hunting event, IWA 2018, in Nuremberg, Germany, for their worldwide launch. Embedded herein is a tweet from Blackwater, or not a tweet, but looks like a Facebook page photo. Blackwater Ammo is in Nuremberg, Come and visit us at IWA Hall 7, stand 7-214. A new breed is born. Join the revolution. Blackwater Ammunition. That is a picture of their booth. There is a picture of a black woman that they have outfitted with a very large assault rifle type weapon with a silencer on it, and she is standing there in a leather jacket and in the awesome gun person pose with the trigger finger outside of the trigger guard as is proper and up against the rail. Fantastic. Wendy continues here. A March 6, 2018 article in Guns Week describes how the original Blackwater brand comes to new life within another business environment, and to make all this possible has been its creator and owner himself, Eric Prince. Wow. Even that sentence is garbage, and that's in a publication, Guns Week. Is that really verbatim from the article? It's really disappointing. Guns Week notes from available info, Eric Prince, quote, provided the Blackwater brand, of which he remains the owner, unquote, but the company is led by Nicola Bandini, once co-founder of Arsenal Firearms, now CEO of Maltese company Precision Ballistic Manufacturing Limited, or PBM. Okay, now we get it. That makes the About Us page from Blackwater Ammo even harder to understand. What garbage. So, and then another page of info from Blackwater Ammunition with glamour shots of their various armor-piercing rounds. Per the ICIJ database, not sure what that is, but it says, the picture here says ICIJ Offshore Leaks Database. Per the ICIJ database, Nicola Bandini and James Fenech were both directors of PBM Limited, and another company, Unified Global Services Group Limited, could be anything, was listed as a shareholder. Other than a few gun trade publications, the launch of Blackwater Ammunition hasn't made a ripple in the news, but it's worth watching to see if Eric Prince is gearing up to revive and expand licensing of the Blackwater brand. That's the end of that particular tweet thread from Wendy Siegelman. And it is interesting that Eric Prince thinks this is an environment where he can revive the Blackwater brand, that the tarnish has finally worn off. So back to Paul Dickinson, who says it's pretty amazing then that they are out there selling armor-piercing rounds and jacketed rounds, metal jacketed rounds, given that that's what caused their fall from grace, if they ever were in the state of grace. It was their trading of liquor to get the United States Army personnel to trade away their jacketed armor-piercing rounds to Blackwater, which was forbidden from having them by the terms of their contract with the Department of State, but they wanted to be able to kill lots of people in spectacular ways anyway, so they got a hold of those things, and then they did in fact use them to kill civilians in Nisour Square. And as he rightly points out, this is basically dancing on the graves of those killed by Blackwater. Jeremy Scahill, Paul Dickinson then says, has also done extensive research and writing on Eric Prince and Blackwater. His documentary about Ali Kinani's death is a chilling narrative of that date, which was September 17th, 2007. And included herein is a link to a YouTube video about Blackwater's youngest victim. Though here they list the date as September 16th, 2007. Employees of the military contractor Blackwater, USA, opened fire and killed at least 14 Iraqis in the infamous Nisour Square massacre. Pretty amazing all around. Now I guess we can sort of double back and see about that. Oh, wasn't there another tweet storm that we were looking at that we didn't divert to the first time? Maybe that was this one here. Let's take a quick look over there. I guess his investigation and the background of his involvement, in the convictions of the Blackwater Guards. Paul Dickinson wrote back in August of last year, 2017, Blackwater murder conviction thrown out other sentences overturned. I represented 6 victims of these crimes. Painful reminder of the fact that those murder cases were apparently overturned. A U.S. appeals court judge said the judge erred in the trial of the private security guards for the 2007 deaths of 14 Iraqi civilians. Certainly disappointing news, and a very nice picture of the youngest victim in life there. Ali was 9 years old when he was shot in the head in the backseat of his father's SUV, and he was pretty badly damaged, and I guess I won't necessarily pass on all the details of it, but a lot of these people were in their cars and, of course, were shot and killed straight through even the minimal protection that a car would provide from a high-powered rifle, and certainly one loaded with armor-piercing rounds. It's going to provide no protection whatsoever, and maybe that was the reason. And I guess that's related to the story we were discussing at the top of the show, that you have to make sure that you're responding with proportional force. In a war zone, of course, it's probably easier to get away with, and it looks like it has been gotten away with. According to Paul Dickinson, the convictions were thrown out. But just as you wouldn't necessarily automatically want to respond to a school shooting situation armed with an AR-15, even if you think the shooter has got one, because of the damage that can be done to bystanders, you would have good reason, even under the George W. Bush administration, to ban private guards working for the Department of State. And remember, the Department of State is supposed to be the diplomats in all this, and they don't really want their guards firing armor-piercing rounds out there, even on a protective mission. I think, probably the assault rifles that they had should have been able to all you need to do as guarding diplomats is lay down enough suppressing fire to get out of there. Armor-piercing rounds, probably just not necessary. But these were cowboys and mercenaries, and they wanted the most amazing, awesome toys, and they wanted to be able to kill people in fascinating and fun new ways. So that's what they did. It doesn't speak very highly of the armed forces personnel either. But imagine all the resentment that we know was reportedly going on certainly by 2007. It was clear to those serving in the actual military that these cowboys for Blackwater were getting paid much, much more than they were. And by contract, their job was considerably more limited, but they were running around with the more awesome toys and killing people like it was free and getting paid 5 times what members of the actual military were getting paid. And then on top of it, they wanted the armor-piercing rounds that the military had and that they were denied, and all they had to do was bribe military personnel, ply them with liquor in order to get it. That does not reflect creditably on the United States Armed Forces. And I would guess, in all likelihood, that if they were able to pin down who did that trading, that those guys have been court-martialed and dishonorably discharged, whereas the people who then took the ammo and murdered people with it are, I guess, walking free because there was an error, a technicality, which, by the way, I am pretty certain there's a pretty good odds that I would say the defendants in this case have spent a considerable portion of their time in their own lives complaining about criminals walking on technicalities. But hey, being on trial for murder will change your view of the proper extent of civil liberties and the strictures of criminal procedure. Happens every time, quite honestly. Anyway, interesting story. Glad to have stumbled upon that one. Pretty amazing at that. Let's see, coming up on our third and final break pretty soon, let's see what else we might catch up on some of the Michael Cohen news. And let's see, a big Brian Beutler story out there being shared very widely about how the media rewards bad faith. I think you probably have a good idea of how that might happen. And then we ought to check in on the latest evidence, as I teased before, on Elliot Broidy. And man, lots to catch up on. Phew, what else can we, is there anything else we can fit in there before hopping off to our latest break. Oh, yes. Did we mention yesterday the fact that the lazy man, Dotard J. Trump, who won't get out of his golf cart when crossing the greens on his own golf courses, has apparently resisted all insistence by his staff that he switch away from his unsecure personal cell phone. He finds it, he says, too inconvenient to use the secure cell phone, and so God only knows what people are finding out by listening to his phone conversations or what malware he has on the phone. But, yeah, never mind all of that. He can't be bothered with national security. Why start now, I say. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It occurs to me we may have mentioned that too inconvenient excuse that Trump gave for using his own cell phone yesterday, but I'm not entirely certain that we did. But just to put that on the record out there, because that'll certainly come up at some point, and lots of people scratching their heads, sort of, wink, wink, wondering why is it that everyone was so hard on Hillary Clinton for her email practices and information security practices, including Democrats, including Hillary Clinton supporters were very hard on her for her practices, and thought, well, we really shouldn't have found ourselves in this situation of such bad optics at a minimum. And, nobody gives a crap about what's going on with Donald Trump, and certainly was not of any interest to anyone during the campaign. And even though it seems to be of interest now, nobody really saying all that much about it. And certainly no Donald Trump supporters saying, yeah, that probably shouldn't be happening. Although I guess people inside the White House, allegedly, at least know that it shouldn't be happening. But that's, that's the way we do things here in this country. And there's lots of good theories about why that might have been the case. Let's get on, though, to a couple of other of the topics I mentioned as being up for consideration. Paul Campos at the New York Magazine, following up on his initial theory that Elliot Broidy was not, in fact, the one who had the affair with Shara Beshard, no R in the beginning there, but that it was Donald Trump, and that Broidy's only role was currying favor with Trump by agreeing to, A, make the payments to her rather than have Donald Trump make those payments, though we don't know whether there were any plans to reimburse Broidy, or publicly taking the blame for it along the way when the payments became known. And why, you might ask, why would Elliot Broidy pay $1.6 million to cover up for Donald Trump? And of course, well, there are several reasons, and not the least of which is he was getting a tremendous return on his investment. But even if he wasn't, it's not that difficult to understand that a person of some considerable means might be willing to do that just to ingratiate himself with the president or protect his president, if, as if it mattered. I mean, this is the sort of thing that you could very easily understand, I think, not understand to the extent that you might be willing to do it yourself, but I could understand why people who have no morals whatsoever would be willing to take a dive to protect a president, because the president can reward them tremendously. And if you are a person like Elliot Broidy, that's what's on your mind. So here's the deal, what Paul Campos writes up here. Hey, look, more evidence that Broidy may have been covering for Trump in that Playmate affair. And he references the information, I think, brought to our attention by, it might have been Wendy Siegelman, but could have been someone else now that I'm thinking about it. We'll see if it gets credited here. That the payment and the payoff of a private meeting with the president came very close in time. Saturday, December 2nd, 2017 was a big day for David Dennison. That's the fake name. Dennison, as Donald Trump was called in his hush money agreement with Stormy Daniels, was taking a break from the golfing trips that dominated his weekends for that entire fall. You remember how that went. Today, there was no time for golf. He was traveling from the White House to New York City, where he would spend all day on Wall Street fundraising for his 2020 re-election campaign and for the Republican National Committee. So, very busy guy, right? Trump would not get back to the White House until 4:45 p.m. But he still found time in his busy schedule that day for one more meeting. And that's not an extraordinary thing for a president to have to do. Another meeting, it's still 40, we don't close shop until at least 5, right? We got time for one more meeting. Donald Trump, though, that's like a tall order. Well, he was golfing, and now he went from the White House to New York City and fundraised all day, and he gets back to the White House at 4:45. He's done. But he has one more meeting. The get-together was with a wealthy Republican fundraiser and lobbyist, Elliot Broidy. Broidy, who had been convicted in 2009 of bribing public officials, had spent all of 2017 investing enormous amounts of time and money to acquire what his business partner, George Nader, termed, quote, this priceless asset, a private meeting with the President of the United States. This asset could be given a quite precise price. A remarkable investigative report from the Associated Press, we read it yesterday, describes what appeared to be a particularly brazen quid pro quo. You remember what it was? Here was the deal. After a year spent carefully cultivating 2 princes from the Arabian Peninsula, Elliot Broidy, top fundraiser for President Donald Trump, thought he was finally close to nailing more than $1 billion in business. So if you're going to get $1 billion, $1.6 million to pay out in order to get $1 billion is, of course, a good deal, right? He had ingratiated himself with the crown princes from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who were seeking to alter U.S. foreign policy and punish Qatar, an arch rival in the Gulf, that he dubbed the Snake. To do that, the California businessman had helped spearhead a secret campaign to influence the White House and Congress, flooding Washington with political donations. Broidy and his business partner, Lebanese-American George Nader, pitched themselves to the crown princes as a back channel to the White House, passing the prince's praise and messaging straight to the president's ears. Remember all of this? Now, in December of 2017, Broidy was ready to be rewarded for all his hard work. It was time to cash in. In return for pushing anti-Qatar policies at the highest levels of American government, Broidy and Nader expected huge consulting contracts from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, according to an Associated Press investigation based on interviews with more than 24 people and hundreds of pages of leaked emails between the two men. Now, Paul Campos picks things back up. The consulting contracts, according to Broidy's own correspondence, were what the December 2nd meeting was about. And a few days later, Broidy got his payoff. The UAE awarded his company a deal worth up to $600 million over the next 5 years. Here's some additional context that now seems especially noteworthy. Just 2 days before that meeting, on November 30th, Broidy wired $200,000 from his Bank of America account to Real Estate Attorneys Group, a California firm. That's his own group, of course. As I recall from previous reading, that's his wife's outfit. On December 5th, REAG transferred that money to attorney Keith Davidson. And you remember him. Davidson was at the time supposedly representing the legal interests of Shara Beshard, a Playboy model with whom Broidy now claims to have had an affair. Beshard fired Davidson shortly afterward when she became convinced that Davidson was actually working in concert with Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's personal attorney, to protect Cohen's client's interests rather than hers. Now, that $200,000 was supposed to be the first of 8 quarterly payments that, quote, David Dennison agreed to make to Beshard in order to buy her silence about an affair and a subsequent abortion. All this was laid out in an NDA recovered from Michael Cohen's office when it was raided last month. And by the way, just in hindsight now, think about how foolish it was to do things this way. And we were railing on how foolish it was to be so lazy that you didn't even change the names in the NDA. And in hindsight, and really probably at the time it should have occurred to us, and it did, and people hinted even then that it was really not Elliot Broidy who was behind this, but rather Donald Trump. And viewed through that lens, using the same names in the NDA makes a little more sense. It seems like you would at least change the name of David Dennison if you were talking about a different person. But writing an anonymous contract about hush money for sexual relationships using the exact same names makes a lot more sense if you're really talking about the exact same person. Although there was certainly a new Peggy Peterson involved. But it makes a lot more sense to keep the David Dennison if you're still talking about Donald Trump. 4 days after the raid on Cohen's office on April 13th, the Wall Street Journal published a story claiming that this David Dennison in the NDA signed by Shara Beshard was none other than Elliot Broidy, despite its being precisely the same pseudonym Trump had used in the Stormy Daniels NDA. And again, from the other side, you can say, well, the story claimed that Peggy Peterson was Shara Beshard, despite the fact that it's precisely the same pseudonym Trump had used in the Stormy Daniels NDA for Stormy. The paper's basis, though, for its scoop was this. Whoever leaked the existence of the Beshard NDA to the Journal also asserted that the agreement was between Beshard and Broidy. Whoever told them that it existed said, oh yeah, in this case it's Elliot Broidy, not Donald Trump. Okay, I'll just write that down. The Journal's reporters confronted Broidy. Broidy immediately confessed to having had a long-running affair with Beshard and subsequently agreeing to pay her $1.6 million to buy her silence about it. So they go with it. The first payment of the agreement was supposed to be due on December 1st, December 1, 2017. That is the story Broidy told the Journal, and that story has, remarkably enough, become accepted as simple fact. Though really, there's no reason to believe any of those sources, and it seems like a tall tale, right? Indeed, the AP concludes its bombshell expose of Broidy's machinations by observing that Broidy had gotten Shara Beshard pregnant and had agreed to pay her $1.6 million to help her out as long as she never spoke about it. But as I, meaning Paul Campos, argued at length and in detail in this space 2 weeks ago, Broidy's account raises a lot of questions, and I believe a more plausible explanation of all the facts at hand is that he agreed to pay Beshard 7 figures as a favor to Donald Trump, who actually impregnated Beshard, and then needed to hush her up about their affair and her subsequent abortion. Trump, I pointed out, is exactly the kind of man who has affairs with women like Shara Beshard, while Broidy has a history of bribing public officials to further his business interests. Indeed, he had even made payments to the mistress of a politician he was bribing. So he's familiar with this situation and can do it, has done it before. And it was clear Broidy had spent much of 2017 touting his connections to Trump to various foreign officials. The AP expose only strengthens the evidence for my hypothesis. The first payment from Broidy came 2 days before the meeting that apparently helped him ink a 9-figure deal with a foreign country. A deal based in no small part on his access to and influence on Donald Trump. If it's difficult to imagine Broidy being willing to take the fall for Trump's affair with Beshard and then paying her a 7-figure sum, it's much simpler to imagine it simply as a perfectly timed and fantastically profitable bribe. It's also important to keep in mind that the only hard evidence for Broidy's claim that his payoff to Beshard wasn't actually a straight-up bribe of the President of the United States continues to be Broidy's own assertions. Now, you are a convicted felon, or convicted of now, I guess, a pled down misdemeanor, right? But you've been convicted of bribery before, and specifically of making payments on behalf of politicians you were bribing to their mistresses. But we should believe you as a truth teller when you say, no, This time is different. I really did this thing, which by all other accounts appears to be the work of Donald Trump. My repeated attempts, Campos writes, to get Bechard's current attorney, Peter Stris, S-T-R-I-S, to comment on this matter have been unsuccessful. They've been remarkably quiet. It's interesting. Journalists, including those AP reporters who pulled together such a remarkable and important story, might want to be cautious about taking Broidy's word on the matter, or any matter for that matter, at face value. I think that's good advice and well observed once again by Paul Campos. Okay, let's see. Other things that we want to get to here before closing out the show for the day. The big shoe that dropped, according to the Washington Post. Let's take a look at Aaron Blake's piece from yesterday. A big shoe, a really big shoe, drops in the Mueller probe as the taxi king flips. Who is that? Well, when it comes to seminal moments in the Russia investigation, it will one day look back upon. Tuesday, that's yesterday, could be one of all the days involved in the investigation. Yesterday was one of them. The Post's Rosalind S. Helderman confirms that Michael Cohen's one-time business partner, Evgeny Gene Friedman, a.k.a. the Taxi King, everybody's a king around here, has reached a plea deal with prosecutors and will cooperate with the government. This news was first reported by the New York Times. Evgeny Friedman, known as Gene, an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, no, long known as the Taxi King of New York, not the Sausage King of Chicago, but the Taxi King of New York, pleaded guilty to criminal tax fraud in Albany County Court. He is a former business partner of Cohen who managed taxis owned by the president's lawyer for several years. State prosecutors said Tuesday that Friedman, who operated 800 taxis between 2012 and 2015, failed to remit a 50-cent per ride tax owed to the state. Instead, he filed false tax returns designed to hide the theft, they said. During that period of time, he was operating taxis controlled by Cohen, according to people familiar with their relationship. So, okay, the state of New York taxes every taxi ride 50 cents a piece, and he didn't pay any of the money. He just kept it and said he paid it. Both the timing and the circumstances are key. Friedman faced allegations that he failed to pay $5 million in taxes, including 4 counts of tax fraud and 1 of grand larceny. As part of the deal, he will serve no jail time. This is some deal. That suggests that he's been able to provide information of some value when it comes to Cohen, who is widely seen as a target for prosecutors to, in turn, flip against Trump. Do you understand the nature of the benefits your attorneys have accomplished on your behalf? Judge Peter Lynch asked Friedman on Tuesday, according to the Times. That question should frighten both Cohen and President Trump's legal team. And there's certainly every indication that they're running scared, but okay. There is no official indication that Friedman has agreed to inform specifically on Cohen, but it's not difficult to connect the dots. Friedman was first charged in June, but he has only now reached a plea deal as the noose has steadily tightened around Cohen's neck. And this isn't just an acquaintance. This was a business partner in an industry where Cohen's conduct has come under a microscope. If anybody knows about what Cohen has done wrong, Friedman may have been the most likely candidate, especially if Cohen did keep Trump in the dark about his Stormy Daniels payment and other matters. In an update, we are told Friedman is reportedly downplaying the prospect of informing on Cohen. Here is a tweet that from Stephen Brown that reads, Taxi King Gene Friedman texts, Michael is a dear, dear personal friend and a passive client. That's it. This is me taking responsibility for my actions and has nothing to do with Michael Cohen, or MC as he calls him. Cohen's case isn't being handled by special counsel Robert S. Mueller's team of investigators, but instead by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, which received a referral from Mueller's team before raiding Cohen's office and home last month. But any plea deal could involve informing for the Mueller investigation. Just as it has been clear that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort was a target for flipping against Trump, Cohen's fate seems to revolve around whether he might be pressured into taking a deal like Friedman was. Cohen has said that won't happen, and Trump wagered last month that Cohen won't flip, but it looks increasingly like we're about to find out just how much pressure Cohen can withstand. Definitely very interesting. Worth keeping an eye on and keeping up to date with. Let's see. Another interesting report on Michael Cohen, this time from the New York Times, under the headline, Michael Cohen bonded with Russia-tied CEO, though the deals didn't pan out. And that one is about his relationship with, what's his name? Intrater. What's his first? Andrew Intrater, the cousin of the Russian oligarch who was behind Columbus Nova. Remember, we really never really figured out what Columbus Nova was all about. And here's the deal, at least in the lead of the article. During an impromptu meeting at the Polo Bar in Midtown Manhattan just weeks before the 2016 election, Michael Cohen and Andrew Intrater struck up a conversation about investing in the taxi business. Doesn't sound like a good bet now, though, does it? Mr. Cohen, President Trump's personal lawyer and longtime fixer, had made millions from his ownership of taxi medallions and other ventures in that industry. Mr. Intrater, an American private equity executive whose cousin and largest client, P.S., is a Russian oligarch, was looking for new investment opportunities. It was really a pleasure to meet you last night, Mr. Intrater wrote in an email to Mr. Cohen the next day. I learned a lot about the taxi business and the possibilities which are now out there. Maybe something interesting will emerge. It's a nice note. He's conducting himself professionally, looking for investors and leads. Over the next year, the two men sat together at one of Mr. Trump's inauguration dinners, along with the oligarch, Viktor Vekselberg. Interesting that he was there for the inauguration, don't you think? One of the richest men in Russia. Mr. Intrater's firm, Columbus Nova, signed Mr. Cohen to a $1 million consulting contract. And Mr. Cohen urged Mr. Intrater to attend Republican fundraising events after the inauguration. It was one of multiple new client relationships Mr. Cohen lined up at the dawn of a new presidency as corporations clamored for his insights into the unfamiliar terrain of Mr. Trump's Washington. Without an official role in the White House, Mr. Cohen instead capitalized on his ties to the new administration, securing consulting deals with AT&T, Novartis, and other businesses that wanted access and advice and unsuccessfully pitching himself to others. Now, Columbus Nova was a surprise addition to this list. It had little business before the Trump administration. Some details of the firm's relationship with Mr. Cohen and the full extent of what he promised or performed remain unclear. But two people authorized to speak on Columbus Nova's behalf said that Intrater was impressed with Mr. Cohen after watching a stream of wealthy donors greet him at the inauguration. And this is where, I mean, at least it makes a certain amount of sense in when it's explained this way. Mr. Intrater, who paid $250,000 to attend the event, the inauguration dinner, expected Mr. Cohen to open his Rolodex of Republican donors to recruit new deals and investors for Columbus Nova, the people said. After signing the contract with Mr. Cohen, Mr. Intrater emailed him to say, really looking forward to blowing it out. What happens here, of course. Intrater seems like a marginal guy in the private equity world, but we've learned from Bain Capital's saga and a few other private equity groups that the main occupation of private equity guys, no one knows exactly why they make so much money for what they do, except that they just skim it off of other rich people. The main occupation is raising money to play with, other people's money to play with. You find rich dudes to give you money. Give me $1 million, put it in my private equity fund. I'm going to pool together $1 million from a bunch of rich guys. I'll use that cash to perform, to execute leveraged buyouts of other businesses that I think I can squeeze for big time dollars, whether that's by selling off the parts or bankrupting the business that we buy by maxing out its lines of credit and its ability to take loans from the banks and then not repay them and just dissolve the thing in bankruptcy and keep all the money that we looted, and we divide it up into tranches that we can use to pay back with interest all of the people who gave me $1 million. That's the deal of private equity. That's the supposed genius of private equity. That's all it is. And this guy was, I guess, just getting started. And a good way to get started is if your cousin is a billionaire Putin oligarch, he'll say, why not? I need to launder money in U.S. Here is $500 million. And then, of course, you're a private equity fund capitalized at $500 million. Other billionaires or millionaires begin to think maybe it's not such a bad idea to give him $100,000, $300,000, $500,000, $1 million. After all, he's capitalized at $500 million already. All you have to do is pay off possibly murderous Russian mobster first, and you'll get your money later on. Anyway, little in the way of deals ever materialized. Columbus Nova declined the few investments that Mr. Cohen proposed. Here's the funny part, I guess, of the deal, right? They say, well, Donald Trump's fixer, that guy is going to have access to a lot of really great deals / scams, and we don't really care what there's no difference for us as between scams and deals as private equity guys. We like to pretend we're white collar, but again, all we do is bust out going concerns that we're able to leverage to death. So we're not concerned with that. Surely Donald Trump's fixer has his finger on the pulse of a lot of those things. And even if he doesn't, he knows all these rich people. They all came to say hello to him at the inauguration. So surely either some of them have business concerns willing to be bought out and busted, or at the minimum, they might be interested in sending $1 million our way to add to the pot for our buyouts and bust outs of other people. But instead, Michael Cohen is adult, and here's what he comes to bring us. So if you pay me $1 million, I'll bring you investment ideas. And Cohen doesn't really understand what private equity is all about. So instead of bringing him, well, there's this company or that company that's leveraged to the hilt and you can buy them out and bust out their pension system or whatever, he instead says, oh, investment opportunities, ideas for like inventions and stuff. So Cohen gets $1 million and he comes to Columbus Nova with ideas, as reported here, including alcohol-infused ice pops. Wouldn't it be great if you could get drunk from a popsicle? You guys should put $1 billion in that. You got any other ideas? That's really stupid. I mean, he probably didn't say that. You got any other ideas? How about, this is serious. This is the next one on the list. How about loaning money to, I don't know, distressed taxi medallion owners? Literally, that's what's listed. His proposal, just straight out of the article, including alcohol-infused ice pops, distressed taxi medallion loans, and an oil and gas operation in the United States. And Mr. Cohen, as it says here, was unable to provide the kinds of investors Columbus Nova was seeking, according to documents and the people connected to the firm, speaking on condition of anonymity, and you know why they would do that. After 7 months and $580,000 in payments, Columbus Nova parted ways with him. They got to halfway and they said, you're an idiot. And InTrader, I guess, now admits, I was fooled. He was getting greeted by important people at the inauguration, and he works for Donald Trump. And I bought into the Apprentice idea that he was a genius businessman. Or at the very least, he was a scam artist. And honestly, that's all private equity really is a giant white-collar scam. Donald Trump is like some sort of, I don't know what, pink, red, black collar scammer. But, we should be able to come up with a few ideas here. And when Cohen found out, oh, I'm supposed to come up with investment ideas, that's what I'm being paid for, that's what he comes up with. How about if you have alcohol-infused ice pops? Nah, that's pretty dumb. Well, I got an idea. How about if you lend me a bunch of money? Not really seeing the upside on that one, Mike. You got another thing for me? You know what people are making a lot of money with? Oil and gas. We should mine for oil and gas here in the United States. Well, my cousin Vexelberg, I think he's probably pretty connected when it comes to oil and gas stuff, probably over in Russia. It will work out a lot better. You got anything else? I don't know. How about paying porn stars? All right, you know what? I think we're done here. Tell you what. You keep the 580 I've given you. I'll write it off as a loss, and we'll just part ways. So as it turns out, the consulting contract itself was reviewed by the New York Times, and it didn't specify the services Cohen was supposed to provide. So I guess that was easy to get out of, I suppose. Representatives for Columbus Nova said that if Mr. Vexelberg, one of the 7 Kremlin-linked oligarchs who were hit with sanctions in April by the Trump administration in retaliation for Russian meddling, has never owned the firm and had no role in its decision to hire Mr. Cohen as a consultant. Vekselberg met with Cohen multiple times, a person briefed on their discussion said, but although the purpose of those meetings is unclear, Vekselberg would have an interest in the administration's stance on Russia. So this makes sense of his involvement, though, with Columbus Nova, even if Vekselberg didn't have direct control of Columbus Nova, though it's a little bit difficult to believe that that's the case since he was probably the leading investor in it. But you can understand all by itself how Andrew Intrater could have ended up being fooled by the Trump mystique and Cohen's seeming cachet. But by the way, how embarrassing is that to show up for the for the inauguration dinner and then get hit with sanctions later on? Well, very interesting. And I'm glad we got a chance to take a look at this one and come to understand how Columbus Nova got in the mix. Next up, of course, Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I'll tell you what's coming up
From
next.
Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's jump right down to here. Civil rights religious leaders were arrested at the nation's capital while demanding restoration of the Voting Rights Act. Continuing to struggle with the idea of players protesting police brutality, the NFL now wants in-game penalties for kneeling during the anthem. And Michigan has scrapped its racist Medicaid work exemption, but it's still happening in other states. Stay tuned for more.